Hello students, now we will look about manpower planning. This module on manpower planning will enable you to compile the concepts and process of manpower planning in an organization and also understand and manage the demand and supply forecast in the manpower of the organization. Manpower planning or human resource planning are both synonymous, and sometimes we also use the term personnel planning. Human resource planning determines the human resource needs of the whole enterprise and its every department for a given future period of time and the various operations envisaged in connection with the accomplishment of the organizational objectives and department goals. Human resource planning is the predetermination of the future course of action for procuring, developing and separating the human elements of the enterprise. It incorporates all human beings at all stages in the organization. It is essentially concerned with the process of estimating and projecting the supply and demand for different categories of personnel in the organization for the years to come. In the early days of industrialization, when we look into the history of manpower planning, managers rarely had to think ahead about the number and kind of people required to get the work done. Now, let us look into the history of manpower planning process. The origin of manpower planning, the predecessor of modern human resource planning, predates the beginning of the 20th century management theory. The issue as raised by the Frenchman Henri Fayol, his famous 14 points for management are still considered valid even today. One point, namely the stability of the tenure of personnel, points out the need for administrators to bear responsibility in planning the human resources and ensure that human and material organization is consistent with the objectives, resources and requirements of the enterprises. And also a deep recession in the late 1950s sparkled the need for a new way of thinking about management, and people were increasingly viewed as assets, the human resources that could be either developed or wasted. Now let us look into the definition of manpower planning. There are many persons who define the manpower planning, and one among is Eric Vetter, who has defined manpower planning as the process by which management determines how the organization should move from its current position to its desired manpower position. Through planning, the management strives to have the right number and right kind of people at right place at the right time, doing things which result in both the organization and the individual receiving maximum long run benefit. Personnel planning involves an accurate determination of the present and the future manpower needs of the enterprise and exploration of the sources to meet the same. Now, let us see the elements of manpower planning. Personnel planning comprises 4 elements. As we have already discussed, personnel planning, human resource planning and manpower planning are all synonymous. So, the elements go on with 4 elements, and the number 1 is assessment of present manpower position or undertake a human resource audit. So, this will be the first element. The second element will be the assessment of the future prospects in the organization, that is its immediate and long run objectives. Number 3, consideration of the effects of these objectives and plans on the future demand and supply of the personnel. And finally, number 4, balancing of the demand and supply of personnel to avoid excess or shortage of personnel. So, these are the elements of manpower planning. Now, let us look into all these elements in detail. The first one, as said, planning for the present manpower position or human resource audit comprises of 2 steps. So, this assessment of manpower position will call for an analysis of employees currently working with the enterprise and evaluation of the jobs being done by them. So, this will be done with the collection of particulars such as name, age, educational qualification, training, experience and specialized skills of the employees in the enterprise. These particulars would also show whether there is overstaffing or understaffing in the enterprise, as also the number and time of replacement to be arranged upon retirement, uncertainties like death of the existing employees. Analysis or evaluation of the jobs being performed by the present employees will highlight various features: the nature of work done by each worker, the method employed by him to do it, the rationale of doing it as such, the skills, education, training required to perform the work, and how this particular job is related to the other jobs, and what physical and environmental conditions need to be created for proper performance of the job. The second element of manpower planning is to consider the future prospects, as we have done already with the current aspect in the first stage. So, the assessment of the direction of the enterprise will call for a careful analysis of the objectives and plans of the enterprise for the immediate and the distant future. Such analysis will naturally be based on the extent and type of anticipated production and any likely changes in the methods which may affect the content of the workforce. The next element, that is the third element, is forecasting future personnel demand and supply. Analysis of the future personnel demand will take into account the extent of anticipated demand, nature of production methods and the extent of decrease in workforce due to deaths, retirements, dismissals, resignations, etc. And future demand is sought to be met by the means of internal sources. Now we will go to the fourth element of the manpower planning process: balancing the demand and supply of personnel. While an enterprise may not be in a position to do anything about an increase or decrease in the external personnel supply, it can certainly benefit by anticipating it and relating it to its own future requirements. Whether the forecast indicates shortage or surplus of personnel, the basic purpose of personnel planning is to ensure that there is always a proper balance between the number, skill, kind and quality of the personnel employed by the enterprise. So far we have seen about the various elements in the manpower process. Now we will go to the manpower planning process. There are various steps in which the manpower planning process has to go on in an enterprise. With the expansion of the enterprise, adoption of complex technologies like computers and professional management techniques, the process of human resource planning has assumed a great significance. It consists of the following 4 stages. Stage 1, analyzing organizational plans and deciding the objectives. Stage 2, analyzing factors for manpower requirements. Stage 3, developing employment plans, and stage 4, developing human resource plans. So this will altogether accumulate the process of manpower planning process. Now let us go through in detail all these 4 stages. Now stage 1, analyzing organizational plans and deciding objectives. So now how do we go about it? The process of human resource planning of an organization should start with analyzing the organizational plans. Analysis of the organizational plans and programs helps in forecasting the demand for human resources as it provides the quantum of future work activity. The ultimate mission or purpose is to relate future human resources to the enterprise needs so as to maximize future returns on investment in human resources. The business plan would be the blueprint of the desired objectives. This objective, stated in economic terms, would incorporate the growth rate of the enterprise, diversification plans, market opportunities, and government policies. Therefore, manpower planning should meet 2 requirements, namely, it should be directly related to the essential nature of the organization. The changes in the selected factors should be proportional to the changes in human resources required in the organization. The stage 2 will be analyzing the factors for manpower requirements. The existing job design and analysis may thoroughly be reviewed, keeping in view the future capabilities, knowledge and skills of the present employees with us. The job generally should be designed and analyzed reflecting the human resources and based on future organizational plans. The factor for manpower requirements can be analyzed by two ways, namely number one, demand forecasting, and number two, supply forecasting. So, demand forecasting is the process of estimating future requirements of manpower by function and level of skills already available. It has been observed that the demand assessment for operative personnel is not a problem, but projections are very difficult. Two kinds of forecasting techniques are usually available. They are number one, judgmental forecast, and number two, statistical projections. The judgmental forecasts are the conventional methods that involves judgment of those managers and executives who have intensive and extensive knowledge on human resource requirements. So, this again can be done by two types, one the managerial estimate and the number two by Delphi method. So, managerial estimate, in this method here what will be done is the managers or supervisors who are well experienced with the workload, efficiency and ability of the employees will decide on the number and type of human resources. So, the next method to forecast is by Delphi method. This is a survey approach method that can be adopted with the Delphi technique. So, this is the process that requires a large number of experts from various areas who take turns to present their forecast statement with all possible assumptions, and finally a decision may be taken. The second method of forecasting is statistical projections. So, these statistical projections are based on statistical methods such as ratio trend analysis, econometric model and work study technique. So, we have three in this. So, one is the ratio trend analysis, econometric model and work study techniques. Second method of forecasting is statistical projections. So, these statistical projections are based on statistical methods such as ratio trend analysis, econometric model and work study technique. So, we have three in this. So, one is the ratio trend analysis, econometric model and work study techniques. And now, let us see into ratio trend analysis. This analysis is carried by studying the past ratios and forecasting ratios for the future. The components of the initial and internal and environmental changes are considered while forecasting the future ratios. So, the second model is the econometric model. The previous data is analyzed and the relationship between different variables in a mathematical formula is developed. The mathematical formula developed is applied to forecast of movements in the identified variables to produce manpower requirements. The next forecasting technique of manpower planning process is work study technique. These are generally used to study work measurement. Under this, the workload analysis, future workload is analyzed and is suitable when the workload is measurable. The work study technique takes into account the productivity pattern for the present and the future. Internal mobility of the workers like promotions, transfers, external mobility of the employees like retirement, deaths and voluntary retirements should also be taken into consideration. So, this is all about demand forecasting, where we have studied under two heads. And next method of forecasting will be supply forecasting. So, this supply forecasting is concerned with the human requirements from within and the outside of the organization. The first step is to forecast the future supply of human resource and obtain the present human resource inventory. So, I hope you all know what is inventory. Inventory is just the stock of how much human resources are available in the present. The supply forecasting includes human resource audit, employee wastage, charges due to internal promotion, changes due to internal promotions and working conditions. The steps are discussed. The step 1 will be to audit the human resources. So this is human resource audit. The first step includes analysis of each employee's skills and abilities. This always facilitates the human resource planners with the understanding of the available skills with us and the abilities of the employees. These job inventories must be updated periodically in order to avoid employees being ignored for job openings within the organization. Number 2 will be employee wastage. The second stage of supply forecasting is estimation of future losses of human resources in each department and altogether with the entire organization. This is done to identify the employees who leave the organization and to forecast future losses likely to occur, such as retirements, layoffs, dismissals, disablement, ill health, death, and reasons for high labor turnover. Absenteeism should be analyzed and remedial measures need to be taken in this regard. And the step 3 will be to consider the internal promotions and working conditions. Analysis is undertaken regarding the vacancies likely due to retirements and transfers and employees of particular groups and categories which are likely to be promoted. And finally, a summary on the requirements is made by the team. The stage 3 of manpower planning after forecasting its demand in the organization is developing the employment plans. After determining the number of personnel for each job in the organization, the human resource department has to determine various factors. So the factors like nature of job, job description and job specification all has to be studied very much in detail. A job description will generally describe the work performed, the responsibilities involved by an employee, the skills or training required to promote their working conditions under which the job is done. The relationship with other jobs and personal requirements on the job is also to be considered. The job specification is an output of job description. It states the minimum acceptable qualifications that the newcomer must possess when he or she is recruited or selected to perform the job satisfactorily and also successfully. The final stage, stage 4, is developing the human resource plan. The net human resource requirements in the terms of number and components are to be determined in relation to overall human resource requirement. After determining the supply and the demand of the employees, when the internal supply of the employee is more and the human resource surplus exists and the external recruitment is stopped. Besides this, the existing employees are encouraged to take voluntary retirement. So this is the case when the supply is higher. It gradually reduces surplus. If the human resource deficit exists, so this is an alternative case when there is a human resource deficit in an enterprise, the planners have to rely on the external sources of recruitment. This is the comprehensive manpower planning process in an organization, where it decides whether the manpower is surplus or deficit and takes accordingly the solutions to meet the personnel demands. Next to learn is the guidelines for making manpower planning effective. We have so far seen the different steps in the manpower planning process, and there are few guidelines now we will look into to see that the ways in which we can improve the effectiveness of manpower planning. So the first of all, the thing that we will have to look into is objectives. The human resource plan must fit with the overall objectives of the organization and also fit into the goals of each department. Important aspects such as working condition of all employees, both male and female, human relationships that exist must be kept in mind while developing these plans. So the next important aspect will be the top management support. So, we all know and accept the management from the top areas. The plan must meet the changing needs of the organization and should enjoy consistent support from top management. The support and commitment from top management and limits of the budgets should also be considered, because the budget planning also plays a major role in par with the manpower planning process. The third important aspect that will be a guideline while planning the manpower process is to have an appropriate time horizon. So, we all know even the time resource, the minute resource is also important in an organization. The period of a human resource plan should be appropriate to the need and circumstances of the specific enterprise. The size and structure of the enterprise as well as changing aspirations of the employees should be taken into consideration while we plan the manpower process. Next guideline that we will keep in our mind is to keep an updated note on a manpower inventory, that is the stock of all employees with us in the enterprise at the present. The quality and the quantity of human resources should be stressed in a balanced manner. Though we have more on quantity and also quality should be emphasized in this area. The emphasis should be on filling future vacancies with the right people rather than merely matching existing people with existing jobs. The organization should maintain job inventory and have an updated employee skill inventory. So, this is a current aspect that the human resource team is going through, is to maintain the updated employee skill inventory so as to meet the job specifications in later areas. The upward mobility of the existing staff needs to be considered carefully. The next effective guideline would be the latest, we can tell that it is the latest technique, which is human resource information systems, which is shortly termed as HRIS. An adequate database should be developed for human resource planning. It has now become part of large organizations and is a computerized system that aids in the process of information relating to the manpower planning. So, it has a database of the employees working with the enterprise and contains data on individuals, demographics, career progression appraisals, skills, interests, training, target positions, geographic preferences, ratings and so on. So, this database will help both the top management and others who are involved in the manpower planning process to know the exact inventory of the employees within our organization. So, the next guideline will be to have an adequacy in the organization and also the coordination. Manpower planning function should be properly organized. A separate planning division must be created to coordinate manpower planning exercise at various levels. The various plans such as procurement, promotion and retention of human resources in an optimal manner should be envisaged by filling future vacancies with the right people. So, these are some guidelines that we will look into and keep in mind when we are planning the manpower planning process. So, this will be a guide for the process on team who are involved in the process of manpower planning. Now, we will see about the benefits of manpower planning. What are the advantages of manpower planning? Manpower planning has gained wide recognition as a reliable tool for effective human resource management. In recent times, even the medium and the small organizations have realized the critical and important role of human resource planning in goal accomplishment and cost reduction. Human resource planning helps the organization in utilizing the existing human resources better through effective planning and timely execution. It assists the organization in anticipating the future trends in demand and supply of the labor force. It replaces the haphazard and thumb rule approaches towards human resource management, with a well-planned, systematic and scientific approach. It forms the basis for all human resource activities including recruitment, training, performance appraisal, compensation fixation and employee retention within the organization. And also the human resource plans are capable of serving both the long-term and short-term human resource requirements of the organization. It facilitates industrial relations by information sharing between the management and labor unions. It also helps the organization determining the career growth of each employee in a systematic manner from one stage to another up the ladder of the organization. The manpower planning process also helps the organization in creating and maintaining a satisfied, well-trained and skillful workforce. Also, there are limitations in manpower planning also. As we have seen lot number of benefits, that is the advantages of manpower planning process to the organization, we also have certain limitations as with the other cases. The limitations of the manpower planning process are the projection of manpower requirements against demand and supply may be risky and inaccurate. Technological changes and fluctuations on the market are uncertain. Lack of support from the top management will be a great barrier and a limitation to the manpower planning process. Human resource planning mainly considers the quantitative aspects and ignores the qualitative aspects such as motivation, career progression, training and so on. So hence nowadays the human resource team also takes into consideration the quality aspects of the manpower planning process and not merely the quantitative aspects. The employees' resistance exists and they feel that it increases the workload, which is a misleading concept. Employers also do feel human resource planning increase the cost of manpower. So this happens when there is a budget deficit and manpower planning becomes a second criteria among the top managers. The top managers also feel that it is a time consuming and expensive exercise. Inefficient information systems with absence of reliable data will fail to develop the effective human resource plans. So these are some of the limitations of manpower planning. So here these can be overcome by the persons and the team who are involved in the manpower planning process to convert all the limitations into advantages. So we can look into all these and make it as suitable to the organization when we plan the manpower planning process. And finally, we will look into what are the barriers in the manpower planning process, what all inhibits the process of manpower planning. Although many organizations have shown keen interest in implementation of manpower planning, there are certain limitations and these are listed. Number one, insufficient realization of the importance to human resource plans. Surplus conditions may occur in the labor market. So this is very much suitable and present in the countries like India, and where we see more labor force and we find that the labor force are surplus in certain disciplines. And also we can see that another barrier will be labor union resistance, and all industries have a labor union and they have less commitment towards the organization, and there is always a misleading concepts that go between a labor union and the top management. This becomes a barrier. And also we see that the cost benefit misconceptions. So most of the organizations feel that this is a costly affair and try to overcome it without giving a major area to it. Absence of coordination. So this absence of coordination will is that exists between the different hierarchies at the top levels, middle levels and the lower levels. And there also exists the future uncertainty, because whatever is planned may not happen as accurate as it is planned. So these becomes the barriers in the manpower planning process. So these barriers may also be taken into account while we plan for the manpower planning process in an organization, whether it is a small or a large organization. And finally, we have come to the concluding session of this module, and to conclude this module, students, manpower planning is hence considered as the process of identifying and then matching the human resource requirements according to the demand and supply. Most of the organizations do follow the manpower planning process as it is asset planning, that is like a property for the organization and the industry. Hope you learned the module and enjoyed. Thank you. Conclude this module, students, manpower planning is hence considered as the process of identifying and then matching the human resource requirements according to the demand and supply. Most of the organizations do follow the manpower planning process as it is asset planning, that is like a property for the organization and the industry.